Stand by to the floor. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Coming to you live from the rich heartland of Altamont Springs, Florida, it's the Vic Show with Victor Bowers, brought to you by SuperChannel WACX TV. Take it away!
Take it away, and we're off. Greetings, Super Channel people. Welcome to the Vic Show and our new graphic we're working on. Isn't that nice? That's in-house production from our talented staff and creative input, and yeah, it looks good. I like it. Looks like looks like we're in a shed. Up on top of a mountain. But no, we're here in Central Florida, here at Super Channel WACX TV, Central Florida. It's in the fall of the year. We've just turned into the fall, so the temperature has dropped 5 degrees from 97 to 92. And but we had a storm move through last night, and hopefully we'll be getting maybe down to 85 today. Nice and much cooler. I can already see my sweaters in the future. But I hope you're doing well, and thanks for joining me again here, Victor Bowers here. Coming to you from Super Channel WACX TV, local Christian TV station here in Central Florida. Orlando, Daytona Beach, Melbourne is our DMA, according to the FCC. And some exciting things are happening here at Super Channel. You can just feel it sometimes. And exciting things are happening in our culture and the world. But you know, that's nothing new. Everything's always changing, except the Lord is unchanging. We know that. He's steadfast. But we're changing. We're always moving around. I'm in a Bible study. It's called Bible Study Fellowship, and this just popped into my head because we were talking about it last night on Monday. We meet on Monday nights. Now we're doing it on Zoom, and it's not as good as it used to be, which is when we'd meet in person in rooms in First Baptist Church of Orlando every Monday night. It was a really wonderful time, and hopefully we will resume that. But we're Zooming now, and we're going through Genesis, and we're talking about the days of creation. And the seventh day was the day where God rested. And we just started kind of just chatting about that and getting some different input. And you know, there's so many, the Sabbath, the day of rest, you can spend a lot of time, getting into that and what it means and all that and the implications of that. But what I realized and what some other guys pointed out was that as human creatures, we are different from all the other creatures that God made. We were the pinnacle of his living creation, humanity, male and female, and that we were to have dominion and authority and responsibility over the rest of the created order that God had made for us to enjoy and for us to be the mirror images between creation and divinity. We were the two-way mirror that would take all the praises of creation, gather them together, and give them to God. And then we would praise God, and he would communicate with us and bless us, bless humanity, and we would go out and then bless the world. And that was Adam and Eve's charge. So the day of rest was a day where humans were commanded, are instructed, or led by great example to rest. And what's different about that is the rest of the created order goes on working. You know, animals go on being animals. Every day an animal has to work and hunt for food. Every day the sun is hot and burning. Every day the earth is rotating. Every day the tides are coming in and out continually. The tides never take a break. They're always working back and forth. All of creation is constantly in motion, continually. There's never rest in creation, except in this creation. See? We are the one thing in creation that has the luxury of doing something that God does. We have the power to rest within activity. The world goes on working, the world, when I talk about the world, creation. But God says, I want you, the creatures that bear my image, the creatures who I put my mouth to your nose and breathed into your nostrils, I want you to be like me on this day. I want you to join me in my rest and grow and just enjoy the creation. And it just struck me. I'm like, that's interesting. I don't know where I got off on a tangent like that, but I hope it fed you. I hope it gave you some insight, maybe some inspiration. But the last couple of weeks I've been on here, I've been stuck, in a good way, stuck in this bizarre story in the book of 2 Kings. The book of 2 Kings, out of this book we call the Bible. We all know about it. It's a story, part of the history of Israel, the ancient nation of Israel that God established to bless the earth through the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the nation of Israel has an interesting, colorful history. It was a nation that introduced monotheism into the world religious scene. All other religions had numerous gods, many gods, but the Jews came along and they had one God. They were a monotheist. They were the first monotheistic religion in human history. And 2 Kings and the Book of Kings and there's the three. I call them the 1 and 2s. There's 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. They're all back to back, and they're basically different historical versions of the same history. With different personalities: Samuel, the prophet, King David, King Saul, King Solomon, then all the other kings of the split kingdom when the kingdom of Israel split in two, unfortunately divided. And 2 Kings gets into part of that. So within 2 Kings, you have this introduction of these prophets, these guys called prophets, what we call prophets, and how they were interacting with the people. And why did God call prophets? Because the priest had the temple and the priest, and the way God had set it up, it had fallen apart. And because men had disobeyed, nothing had changed since the garden, but God was committed. God is not a God who abandons. So he had continually chased his people, pursued all the promises that he had for them. And so in these accounts, we read of these men that were raised up, voices, calling out from the wilderness. And usually they were odd type people. They weren't typical, which is typical of God. He usually picks the last person you would pick. He picks that person because that's part of God's sense of humor. That's just my take on it. But in 2 Kings, around chapter 4, we start reading of these miracles being performed by this man named Elisha. And so that's kind of where I'm going to go today. But before I get into it, the one thing I wanted to leave today with you, or kind of introduce as an overarching takeaway, is that God does not abandon us. He is not one to abandon you. And abandonment hurts. I've been abandoned. And we've probably all experienced abandonment at some time in our life. And it is a deep pain. And oftentimes it happens to us at a part in our life where we don't know it's happening, usually when we're a child. And things happen, and you don't know it's happening because you're a child typically. But you look back, and when you pray or perhaps go through counseling or whatever, or maybe just something happens, you realize that the reason you have such pain or that you're doing things in your life to try to cover up pain is because you were abandoned. Someone left you. And abandonment is one of those very deep personal things. We create, we don't create abandonment, but the way you perceive how experiences in your life can, if it feels like abandonment to you, then it is abandonment to you. Look, growing up, I'll give you an example. In my life, I had an event that happened when I was a kid. I was about 3 to 4 years old. And the reason I know my age was because it centered around the funeral of an aunt. And she was my dad's older sister, and she had died early from breast cancer. And this is back in the early 70s. And it was a tragic event in my family. They still talk about it sometimes today. Aunt Opal, her name was Opal Jean. And she was the star of the family. She was bright, and she's vivacious. She had red hair. She had a big voice. She had a big personality, very talented, very creative. And she was struck with breast cancer and died a painful death. And it just devastated my dad's family. And so I remember the funeral, not because I went to it, but because I didn't go to it. I remember this was 1973, and all this was going down, and I remember I was left behind in the house of my grandmother, and there were other people there, but the Lord took me back to this event only a couple of years ago and started unpacking all the events of that and realized, Victor, you perceived that you had been abandoned because it was, I remember the funeral was on a Saturday, and it was in the fall of the year. I remember that. And all I remember was I was in the house, my grandparents' house, and everybody was in church dress, suit and tie, women in dresses. I thought we were all going to church because everybody was wearing church clothes, except me. I wasn't. And everybody left, and I didn't. And I just remember the experience. And so the Lord said, you weren't abandoned on purpose, but you felt like you had been abandoned. Because all the signs and things that as a 3 or 4-year-old kid meant something to you, you felt like you had been abandoned because you were there and no one else was. And you saw them drive off in their church clothes, assuming they were leaving you to go to church. And that struck me. I didn't know it struck me like it did, but the Lord brought it up only several years ago and worked through that. So abandonment is a real pain. And God wants you to know He does not abandon you. He does not. He has not. He will not. He cannot. He cannot abandon His creation. He is tied to it, married to it, for better or for worse. Like marriage says, for better or for worse, we're stuck. We're stuck. And some of you feel stuck. Some of you feel abandoned. But I want you to know God has not abandoned you. And when you hear that, just let me be, if nothing else, the voice to tell you, God has not abandoned you. He will not leave you. However, I got to abandon you for about 30 seconds, and then I'm coming back, okay? So I'll be here. For more than 43 years, SuperChannel has been broadcasting inspirational Christian television throughout Central Florida, and it's because of generous support from people like you that we have been able to do what we do. Regardless of the uncertainty of our times, God's message of care and compassion is so important, and we are committed to broadcasting it over television more than ever before. If you love that message, we need $43 a month from all of you, with a $43 one-time gift or $43 monthly recurring support. Again, 43 years, $43. Thank you so much. And remember, God loves you, and we do too.
Again, thank you for prayerfully considering support of the ongoing television ministry of SuperChannel Orlando. Connect with us at superchannel.com or text GIVE to 407-707-6123.
See, I'm back. I didn't abandon you. In fact, I'm sitting down. So welcome back. Victor Bowers here with the Vic Show. And God will not abandon you. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. I'm still stuck in a good way in this passage from 2 Kings chapter 4 with this Shunammite woman. We never learn her name. We learn where she's from. And she was a woman who just Google it. Google 7 sneezes in the Bible. 7 sneezes in the Bible, and this whole account comes up because this is a story that kind of expands through all the life of the prophet Elisha. And hopefully today, if I can gather my thoughts well enough, I'll take you to the bizarre ending of even Elisha's bones were still working in the grave. Yeah. And how they tied back to this woman. but you never really read it that far. Anyway, 2 Kings 4, the Shunammite woman, she calls out she wants to make provisions for the traveling priest, the traveling prophet. She does so. They build a home for her, for the prophet, for Elisha. Elisha says, what can we do for you? You've been so gracious to us. Is there something I have the king's ear? Can I give him a request? She's like, no, I don't need anything. I'm fine. And it turns out she's not fine. She has everything on the outside, but she's empty on the inside. And she's a woman who is childless, and her husband is old. So the implication is this: she's fine to have a child, but her husband is old. But God moves. God specializes in old, broken men. So well, he does. And, well, he specializes in broken people, which is all of us. But typically, it's the one who are really standing out, like barren women and old, broken men. And you get the word broken, old, broken men, meaning it's not working. Anyway, well, that's what it means. Come on, folks. Can I get real? I mean, come on. Let's get real. Can we talk? Can we talk? God specializes in broken things. God specializes. Listen, God does have favorites. His favorites are the least, the lost, the lame, the leper, and the dead. He really specializes in the dead. He loves dead people. So this woman, her womb is dead. And so the prophet speaks to it, and it becomes alive. And the next year, a baby comes out of it. A child of promise, and her whole life changes. And then the story, this is 2 Kings chapter 4. The boy dies, and it dies in the mother's lap. And I talked about that in the last several shows. They're on YouTube somewhere or whatever. And she is a changed woman. She runs a prophet down. She brings the prophet back, and she basically is relentless. She's not going to accept she's not going to let God's promise die. God's promise died. God's promise died, but she was not accepting it because she knew in her heart God was not going to abandon her, and she was not going to abandon God. God had healed a broken place in her heart where she was detached, and that no longer existed. So the boy came back to life through 7 sneezes. Again, Google 7 sneezes in the Bible, and the whole story will pop up. It's amazing. It's unbelievable, but it's believable. It's part of the story in our Bible. So the prophet goes in when the boy's dead and lays on the boy, puts his eyes on his eyes, puts his mouth on his mouth, puts his hands on his hands, and performs this miracle. And the boy comes back to life with 7 sneezes. Yeah, who could write this stuff? But it's in there. It's 7 sneezes. So that's in chapter 4 of 2 Kings. Now, 2 Kings chapter 8, the story continues. Did you know that this story continues? The story doesn't end in chapter 4. Time passes, and, because the prophet is walking around and running around, and he's being the voice of God because Israel's in chaos, and they're rebelling, and they're just doing all sorts of crazy things, and kings are coming in and kings are coming out. And this whole era also encompasses Jezebel, that rotten queen. She's the arch monstrous of the Old Testament. And she has a daughter who's worse, Athaliah, Queen Athaliah of Jerusalem. Google that. Yeah, we had never really hear much about her, but she was worse than her mother. Can you believe it? Well, it's in the Bible. But so all this nonsense is going on, and Elisha's running around, with the voice of the Lord and performing these miracles. He wanted a double portion from God, from Elijah, who was his teacher, and God gave it to him. But that kept him a busy man. And so several chapters in the book of 2 Kings passes, but in chapter 8, this Shunammite woman pops back on the scene. And why, pray tell? Oh, why don't we go there and read? 2 King, I think I gave this to the guys in the back. Is this in the machine? Is this in the machine, as my mom would say? Is this in the machine, Victor? Oh, look, there it is. Okay. Chapter 8, 2 Kings. Then Elisha spoke to the woman whose son he had restored to life. saying to this woman, "Arise and go, you and your household, and stay wherever you can, for the Lord has called for a famine, and furthermore, it will come upon the land 7 years." So the woman arose and did according to the saying of the man of God. And she went with her household and dwelt in the land of the Philistines 7 years. 7 sneezes, 7 years. It came to pass at the end of the 7 years that the woman returned from the land of the Philistines. And she went to make an appeal to the king for her house and for her land. Let's stop there for a moment. The woman, Elisha, continues to have a relationship with this woman, a holy relationship. I mean, the woman had been married and she was a woman of great reputation, but maintained a relationship with her. She had been gracious to the prophet, and so, and again, this is the theme: God does not abandon you, and this is showing that the man of God was in relationship with all these people. These people are coming in and out of the scriptures, and this woman was a notable woman who had a great story, a great testimony. She was a notable figure. And so Elisha, though, had been instructed by the Lord to call a famine. Now, there's a difference between famine and drought. When we think of famine, we often think, well, the land is barren and all this stuff's going on. That's not necessarily the case. Elisha wasn't called to pray for drought. Rain wasn't the issue. According to what the Bible says, there was a famine in the land. Famine meaning a shortage of food. But we know today a shortage of food can be a political crisis, have nothing to do with nature. It could be just the political parties fighting, governments fighting, businesses controlling borders, border shutdown. Whatever the case, Elisha had been instructed to call a famine in the land for 7 years. And this is God trying to get the attention of the kings in a form of punishment. But that's what they had asked for through their disobedience. So anyway, but he told the lady, he said, "Ma'am, bad days are coming for 7 years. So move out of the country. Otherwise you may perish." So she did. She was obedient. She was a quick learner. She was a smart lady. She packed up her things and she left town. She went to go live in another land, the Philistines, which is towards the Mediterranean. So she does that. After the 7 years, she comes back. Right on cue. She trusted the man of God. And she comes back. Well, what had happened was her home had been squatted in. So all of her property, all the stuff her wealthy husband had left her, because by this time her husband had died, she no longer had possession of it. And she had no recourse. But she wasn't one, she knew that God would not abandon her. And she had her promise. Her son was there, her family and her son. So she went to the king. Let's go back to what the scriptures tell us about her account. Because she goes back to the king, and it came to pass at the end of the 7 years, the woman returned from the land, and she went to make an appeal to the king for her house and for her land. Then the king was talking with Gehazi. This is Elisha's servant, the servant of the man of God. And the king was saying, this is almost like a change of scene, like you're watching a movie and you change to the next scene. So the king is talking to Gehazi, and the king's like, "Hey, man, tell me all these things your boss did. All these things Elisha has done." Now, it happened as Gehazi was telling and kind of bragging to the king about what his boss had done and how his boss had restored the dead to life and all these things. The woman walks into the king's chamber, appealing to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, my lord, I can see it now. Can you imagine? My lord, king, here's the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. And when the king asked the woman, she told him the whole story. So the king appointed a certain officer for her, excuse me, saying, "Restore all that was hers and all the proceeds of the field from that day that she has left the land until now." Yeah, go back and read it for yourself. 2 Kings chapter 8. The woman comes back after 7 years of being away. She comes back. Her home has been squatted in. All of the land. She was a wealthy woman. She probably owned much of the village of Shunem. All of her land had been confiscated by whoever, the invading armies. and they were producing a prophet. She was a farmer. She was in agriculture. And she was like, I'm not taking this. So she goes to the king. She knows who she is. She knows God does not abandon. She goes to the king, and God has the right man at the right time, at the right place to plead the woman's case for her. She had no political clout. She was a woman. And she was a woman who really had no right to anything. She had abandoned the property. But she comes in, and the man of God is there to prove her case. And she had her son, who had been raised from the dead. And there was no doubting that. And the king gave her back her property and all the proceeds from 7 years of the land being used. All those proceeds went to this woman. God does not abandon. This woman in chapter 4, we read, this woman from Shunem, she reached out. She wanted to help God by housing his prophet, so she was generous. And God was generous with her, not because she paid for God to do something, but because she opened herself to God. It's not about what she gave God. It's about she gave everything she had to God, starting with her generosity and her heart and her home. She opened herself to God in any way she could. That's where the story starts, my friend, in 2 Kings 4. She said, I see this guy's a good guy, and we have the means and the provision to help him. Let's do it. And you see how this woman keeps popping up in positions of where she's inferior, but God promotes her and blesses her because she was open to God from the beginning. And so God did not abandon her. He does not abandon, but this woman did not abandon God. It was not that it's a mutual relationship, but God is quick to take care and show favor to those who are open to it. Not that she was any special favorite, and her money didn't buy God's provision and God's blessing. Her willingness to be open to what God wanted to do. That was it. Anybody can be open. You don't have to be rich to be open. You can be dead poor. But if your heart is open to God, you're rich already in God's eyes. That's the point. And then everybody gets different blessing. God, he pours into your life what you need. Now, quickly, let's go to chapter 13 because the story gets really crazy and has an amazing end. According to Jewish tradition, chapter 13 in 2 Kings, we read verse 20 and 21. Elisha has died. End of the story. Elisha died and they buried him. Now, the bands of the Moabites invaded the land at the coming of the year. You're like, Victor, where in the world are you going in 1 minute? Just hang with me. And it came to pass, as they were burying some random man, that behold, the guys who were buried, the funeral director, they noticed a band of these Moabite marauders coming into the land, so they were trying to run for cover. So they took the body of the man that died, and they threw it into Elisha's tomb. And when the man was let down and the man touched the bones of Elisha indicating that Elisha had been there several years already, the bones revived, the man stood up on his feet. Victor, what in the hell are you doing with this? Where are you going? My point is, according to rabbinic tradition, this man who had died and had been thrown into the grave in a hurry because the funeral director was getting afraid, the man who had died was the son of the Shunammite woman. That's what rabbinic tradition tells us. The Bible just pops that in there at the very end. Then the whole scene changes in 2 Kings 13, and it goes on. And Elisha's forgotten. But Elisha dies, and then Elisha's bones have one more miracle. Remember, Elisha prayed for a double portion from Elijah. Elisha only raised one man from the dead, that Shunammite boy. But even in Elisha's death, God's promise still worked. And the Shunammite boy was raised back to life in Elisha's death through his bones. Second resurrection, double portion proved. See you next time.